Well, good morning, everyone. We will begin our Bible class this morning, and especially good morning to everyone who's out meeting with us this morning electronically. And I suppose it's sort of a Christmas time thing when you think about your friends and people you haven't seen in a while. But Karen, if you're out there this morning, good morning. Nice to have you with us. So we're this morning we're studying Mark chapter 3, and let everybody take a minute and get over to that. We'll start with a word of prayer this morning, and Ray, if I could I impose on you to open us with a word of prayer? Thank you.
Father, thank you for allowing us to study your word you received this morning as we study Mark. And thank you for this time of the year. We celebrate Jesus' birthday, and thank you so much for him and all the blessings that we gain from you. In Jesus' name I pray.
So I guess by way of just clarity, if you will, so Daryl is over in Eastern Washington with his family for the holidays, and so I'm taking the Bible class this morning. Jim Krieg is taking the main lesson for us this morning, and Chris is going to take the Bible class this next Wednesday. So we're sort of pinch hitting for Daryl while he's gone, and I have to say I'm really looking forward to Jim's lesson this morning. I really am. No pressure now, but I really am looking forward to that, and it does bring to mind how grateful I am that Jim and Kendra are with us again, and how much I think they add to who we are and what we do here. I'm really excited for Jim's lesson this morning, and just found myself being very grateful that they're back here with us again. Very nice indeed. And I guess the other, by way of observation, just before we start on Mark chapter 3, I've taught Bible classes over the time here, and I sure found myself in a different mindset as I started preparing for this class. In times past, Bible classes took the form of sort of a lot of pressure on the speaker, because you had to have a full 45 minutes of teaching, let me use that word intentionally. And I've enjoyed our Bible classes recently so much because they are way more of a conversation. They're way more of all of us feeling the freedom to read about something and consider it together and talk about it, and that's a very good thing, I think, that our group does here, is that we feel like that it's all of us participating in a study rather than a speaker, a lecturer, and listeners. It's really nice. And so I sure found myself feeling that as I prepared my thoughts for today. Was that really all I was doing was trying to put together the framework of what we're going to visit about together today. Anyway, so Mark chapter 3, one of the things that Daryl's done a really good job, I think, of as he's presented the beginnings of Mark, is that Mark is a different gospel in several different ways. But one of the unique things about the book of Mark is that it's like Mark has written a lot of bullet points. He's not like John, for example. John has a few things that he wants to say, and he gives a dissertation about it. He just talks and talks, and it's really in depth. Mark is sort of the opposite of that, where he just says, Jesus did this, and then Jesus did this, and then Jesus did this, and Jesus did this. So, as it will be in Mark chapter 3 today, we're going to talk about 3 or 4 or 5 things that Mark's going to bring to us, but he's not going to talk about anything in depth. He's just going to bring it to our awareness, think about it a little bit, and move on. And I just think that's a really, I brought it up intentionally this morning because when we get opportunity to talk with somebody about the gospel, you're confronted right away with a choice. Okay, what should we study together? Boy, Mark is a good book to spend time talking with someone who is learning about the Bible, learning about the Gospels. It's just such a nice way to quickly bring someone up to speed because you just go through all these different thoughts about Jesus and all these different component parts of Jesus' ministry without having to go through any one thing in really deep depth with somebody that frankly may not have enough background to be able to have a deep conversation on anything. So anyway, that sure comes through to me today in what we're going to talk about in Mark chapter 3. That really is going to be this really visual look at the book of Mark, just thought by thought by thought by thought. Anyway, good book, I think, for that reason, and good for us as we know, as we set about how to study with different people. Boy, Mark is a good book for a particular use, if you will. So, Mark chapter 3. It begins, I'm reading the first segment here, verses 1 through 6. And again, Jesus, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, he asked them, the people that were around him in the synagogue, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm? To save a life or to kill?" And they were silent. Folks in the synagogue were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, and grieved at the hardness of their heart, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him to destroy him. So, just an interesting little segment that Mark brings to us. And let me say, as sort of a framework, this is early on in Mark's accounting of Jesus' ministry. This is not deep into it yet. This is at the front end of it. And yet Jesus, as he goes to the synagogue, goes in knowing that the people he's going to be talking with are not going to be happy with him. For the most part, what is the makeup of the folks that he's talking with?
Pharisees.
Mentions Pharisees for sure.
So they're
He says right away that he's in the synagogue. So in other words, he's talking with, for the most part, faithful Jewish people. Yeah? Isn't that interesting to me? Isn't that interesting that Jesus goes into the synagogue at the front end of his time, his several years of doing his job, knowing that the people in the synagogue are upset with him? And what is the emotion that Jesus experiences when he's doing this? Anger. Isn't that interesting? I don't think we read very many more times in the New Testament in accountings about Jesus. How many times do we read about him being angry? Very few. A couple of things come to mind when we all think about him going in and clearing out the temple and all the money changers and that kind of thing. He was upset then. But and I guess I want to say I contrast that with what was Jesus' reaction just before he enters into Jerusalem, right before he's going to be taken into custody and eventually killed. What was Jesus' reaction as he was on the hill looking down at the city? Sadness. Or you might say compassion. That he was doing his job just almost heartsick about the condition that many of the people were in. And yet here, right at the front end of things, what's his emotion? He's angry. There's another little thing I think that's important. It pops up in verse 6. The Pharisees went out immediately and held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. So we're in a situation here now where certainly the Pharisees are talked about right up front. But then right at the end, Mark brings in this business that the Pharisees went out and talked with the Herodians. So who's the Herodians?
So they normally, the Pharisees and the Herodians, would not have been on the same side because the Herodians, well, in the sense that the Herodians had a lot of confidence in the government side of things, Herod.
Exactly.
So they're
Good.
more political.
That's what I was fishing
Yeah,
for.
and where the Pharisees wanted to be separate from that and just follow the law. So normally they wouldn't have been gathering together to accomplish God's will in this. But
Right. Yeah. So you have the Jewish Pharisees, and when we think about the Pharisees, oftentimes we think about Jews who are making up rules to make their religious lives as complicated and as difficult to do as possible. And yet then we have these Herodians who by name are, let me say, Jewish people who think Herod is cool. They call themselves after Herod. So, I'm sort of reading between the lines here. You've got a group of Jews who are doing everything they know how to do to compromise their Jewishness, as opposed to Pharisees who are doing everything they know how to do to make it as complicated as possible. Polar opposites, let me say, polar opposites.
kind of like
Johnny?
far right and far left.
I was just going to go there, kind of like in today's times, far right and far left. That would be Todd.
So, this whole incident here, chapter 3, it is a setup. I don't know if so much this man, this crippled man, is a plant, but he's there, and he is bait for Jesus to take on the Sabbath day. Now Pharisees are going to have a problem with healing somebody on the Sabbath, just as they would somebody picking wheat.
Exactly.
So I guess my question is, because I can't find it anywhere, where healing somebody is a violation of the Sabbath.
Right.
unless you're a Pharisee and you've made that rule.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going to go. It is only a rule when the Pharisees make it a rule.
And notice there, nobody's doubting that Jesus could do this, that Jesus could work this miracle. They're not suggesting he couldn't do it.
Right. That's really not the question.
That's what's amazing to me. Instead of being in awe that he could work a miracle, they're waiting to see him do it so they can accuse him,
Right.
instead of letting it show them who he is.
Exactly. Chris?
He kind of does two things here too, right? Because they ask the question to him, and he does two things. First of all, he answers them and said, yeah, it's lawful, because he heals them.
Right.
But the second thing he does, and this is the thing that's interesting, is he's not mad at them because they've twisted the law. He's mad at them because of their lack of compassion, because of the hardness of their hearts, because they're trying to toy with a man who's in need,
Right.
and that's their game.
Right.
And so he kind of does both things at the same time. He doesn't break the law. He doesn't say, hey, we're going against the law, right? He actually clarifies it like he did on the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes, exactly right.
But at the same time, that's not what's bothering him.
That's not why he's angry.
Yeah, what angers him is the hardness of their hearts.
Right. And I think it's a good visual for us. We ask ourselves the question. It starts off and it just says they, the people that he's talking with, watched him to see whether he would heal, not because they wanted to see another miracle or because they wanted to see him being compassionate, but so that they might accuse him. Isn't it interesting that right at the front end of Jesus' ministry, he is already needing to do his work, the work that his Father sent him to do, to an audience that at least in part are there to accuse him. And this man with a withered hand, I think Todd brought up an interesting way to look at it. That guy was a plant. That was a setup. When Jesus went into that meeting with the Pharisees and the Herodians, he already knew that guy was there, and he had already, I think, purposed to heal him in front of them. In other words, this event was staged for Jesus' purposes to do what he came to do. Todd?
And maybe Chris touched on this already. Jesus asked him if it was legal or not.
He already knew the setup, didn't he?
No, he asked the Pharisee, is this legal?
Yeah. Right.
They didn't answer him, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's legal.
Right.
Trying
So
to-
anyway,
you know,
it's just such an interesting picture into Jesus' ministry, almost from the get-go. Yeah? Almost from the get-go, this was the stage that he was confronted with. Isn't it interesting, let me say, I think Tony said this, there was no question that he could heal. There was no question in these people's minds that this one man had authority, had power far beyond anybody else. The question almost immediately that Jesus is certainly unafraid to talk about is who he is. What does Jesus say right from the get-go about who he is? Who does Jesus say he is? God.
Yeah, I mean, right from Luke 4, well, he talks about, he references back to the prophecy in Luke 4, right? Another instance that happened probably before this, and just says, I'm the one who's come to help the weak, the very people, the very person that he's healing here.
Exactly, right. So I'll take us back to something that we've already touched on in Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. I'm reading now. One Sabbath, he, Jesus, was going through the grain field, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees, our friends the Pharisees here, were saying to him, look what they are doing, and what is not, look, what they are doing is not lawful on the Sabbath. Question. He said to them, have you never read David? And so we went through all of that. So we get down to verse 27. And the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even on the Sabbath. So right from the beginning, Jesus is talking about, so that there's no confusion, he says, I am the Son of Man. Very clear. So you can see this conflict, probably the right word to use. You can see the conflict that is growing right from the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Jesus saying, I'm the Son of Man, I'm God. And the religious, spiritual people of the day are saying to themselves, uh-oh, the gig is up. My place as a Pharisee, my place as a Herodian, my place in wherever you're at in this spectrum of Israel. And isn't it interesting, as we've done so often here and gone back to look in Isaiah, for example, or in the work that we have just been doing recently, what for all of Israel, ask a specific question, Steve. What was Isaiah saying in all that he wrote, especially in the back end of Isaiah? What was Isaiah saying? What was the message in Isaiah? Your God reigns. God is sending forth a Savior, a Messiah. I mean, this is what the Jews have been hearing for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And when this man finally arrives, who claims to be God and then underscores it by miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, what was Judaism's reaction to what they've been looking forward to for centuries? They were angry at him. Right? Todd.
So, and since we went back into chapter 2 there, and I'm glad we did, where Jesus states that he is Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes.
Well, I think that kind of defines the struggle here over the Sabbath. And that is the Pharisees have taken control of that with their rules regarding it. They have set themselves up as to be the police of the Sabbath. And Jesus has said, no, you are not.
No, you're not. I am.
I am the person that controls the Sabbath.
Right.
And I will tell you what you can do and what you can't.
Right.
So that's the dynamic of the power struggle over the Sabbath.
Yeah.
They're fighting over it.
Yeah. So great observation, and that really ties together what I was trying to get to here. Jesus goes into the temple on the Sabbath, and it is a setup. He fully intends, when he walks in the door, to heal this guy with a withered hand. He went there on purpose to do that, to bring up that very conversation that Todd's talking about. Not only does Jesus claim to be God, but he says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. What a definitive moment that we're reading about here. Kevin.
I think, well, I had two thoughts. One is with the comment about Lord of the Sabbath. I think there's definitely a side of it, like, I'm God, like,
Yeah.
that makes me Lord of the Sabbath.
Right.
But there's a side of it that he's, because both of these instances here are, as the Lord of the Sabbath, he's showing them this is what the Sabbath is about.
Yes.
He's not just saying, I'm God and I make the rules up and I
Right.
can tell you what to do. He's saying, like, this is what the Sabbath is really about.
Right.
And that's really important to me. And then something you said was, a moment ago, was about like the Pharisees, their role in the kind of the culture at the time, and how Jesus coming into that upset that
Yes.
balance for them. And I think as far as like, it got me thinking about inward self-application, kind of a self-analysis of it. And I think that's a good question for us. Like, the Pharisees were upset that the Messiah had actually finally come because they weren't concerned about the spiritual side of things. They were concerned about what their role in social and cultural religion, not actual spirituality. And I think in modern times, so much of religion is cultural and social.
It is, isn't it?
And I think that's a really good thing for us to stop and meditate on for ourselves is, is what we're doing here, is that cultural to us, is it social to us? I mean, those are, of course, components, like you can't get away
Sure.
from those.
Can't get
but-
away from it, but
But we're gonna be in the same situation as the Pharisees if that's what where our heart is.
yes.
And I think it's a really deep question to kind of investigate in ourselves whether or not, like, would we be in that same boat where if Jesus came, we're gonna be upset because he's upsetting the balance of things in my situation and placement in society and culture, versus looking inwardly and saying, I am looking for the Messiah as I am looking for a relationship with God because he heals me.
Right.
And he does what he gives me rest, like the Sabbath. He gives me relief and healing from my suffering of my withered hand or whatever the case may be. That's
Right.
what I'm looking for.
Nice. Nice. So, and let me say, it may be the thing that I am most encouraged about in 2023 about this congregation, and as Chris and I try to do the best we can to shepherd this group. Think about the conversation we just had here in the last 15 minutes and how rich that conversation has been. And it's rich not because of the guy that's standing up here, but what all of us do to contribute to make that, whatever we're talking about, come to life, make it real. So I just enjoy so much our Bible classes here, I really do, for all that just happened here. So, beginning in verse 7, and after this event, Jesus is in the synagogue and he's angry, right? And all of this plays out. Verse 7, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed him. So I have to ask myself the question, so how'd that go for the Pharisees? Did they slow this down at all? A great crowd followed him from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea and from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. So this thing is on fire. It's happening now, right? When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. Right? And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. I think that's interesting. Jesus has begun his ministry. He is intentionally going into the synagogue, my words, and picking a fight with the Sadducees and the Herodians, being really, really intentional. And then one of the things we get out of this next reading from 7 through 12, and when he was doing his job, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And then Jesus said, and he told them to be quiet about it. Jesus' purpose was to go and claim himself to be the Son of God. His purpose was to go into the synagogue and declare himself to be the Lord of the Sabbath. So why did he tell these people here, don't say anything? What do you suppose that was about? Why did he say that? Tony?
Well, I think he's saying it to the demons, and they don't make very good marketing. And so he's controlling it and telling them not, even though they know who he is. He's telling them not to tell them.
Okay, so there's an interesting take. I had been seeing this through the lens of the crowd that was gathered around him at the lake. Tony's suggesting that he's not speaking to the crowd gathered around the lake, but rather to the unclean spirits that he's just driven out. And you're saying that because?
Well, I guess I'm just following. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God," but he gave them strict orders not to tell others. So
Okay. So
I
that
thought
could be
just from reading
more
it,
specific to just the unclean spirits.
he's taking control of the situation, whether it's these guys or the crowd. He's making sure that he's not forced into a situation before he's ready.
All right.
But I think
Okay.
he's telling the thing. Another point is that here's demons knowing who he is. That shows us that our response to Jesus is more than just saying we believe in him. This is the demons did. They weren't saved.
Right. Yeah, and in another place we read that even the demons
Know who he is.
know who he is and trembled. Right. So that's an interesting little window into this. I'm searching really fast to try and get an example of this, and it's not coming to me really quickly. But
Well, he's told others that he healed not to say anything either, because he's got a purpose, right? He's got some things that he's going. So, but I do think the language here, the construct of the communication here, points to the demons in this particular case.
it does, doesn't it?
But it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't negate.
Doesn't
fact
change the larger that he is trying to control things.
Nor does it necessarily change the fact that others may have been there when the demons did that and heard him say that.
Right.
So
Yeah. So there's maybe two things going on here, but to Tony's point, and again, I'm just not getting the right example to come to me here, but I'm trying to think of someone who could be here, let me say, in the capacity of Daryl, week after week after week, bringing us lessons, but somebody who came here and did that job and was somebody that every one of us in this place was repulsed by, was turned away by. I'm trying to create this situation in your minds where perhaps Jesus was trying to say, if you are going out talking about the Savior and you delivering the message causes people to step back because of who you are. In other words, let's say this was Satan talking about going out and talking to everybody that Satan could find about Jesus, and we knew it was Satan. How would we react to that? Not very well, right? So maybe, to Tony's point, maybe what's going on here is Jesus saying to the unclean spirits, I don't want you going around talking about me, because I know the reaction that people are going to have to you as an unclean spirit.
Paul did the same thing when the slave girl had that spirit, had a demon, and could acknowledge that what Paul was saying was true.
Right.
And he removed the demon so that he couldn't do it.
Right. Yeah, good thought. Kevin?
I'm just adding on because
Yeah,
like,
good, good.
thoughts. I think that
That's what our conversation's
also,
about.
Also elsewhere in the gospel, we have examples of Jesus saying, you know, it's, the time is not right. You know, this is not the time to fully reveal myself. But I'm trying to look through this, and because the way everything's ordered here is very, like, especially with the Gospel of Mark, things are not chronological. They're not, like, it seems like we have stuff that is, you know, back to back to back, but really there could have been.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know, so the point of that, though, is that Mark is very intentionally putting things in a sequence.
Yes.
So I'm trying to think through how does, you know, going back to, you know, everything that's happened in Mark so far, you know, where does this event fit in with that? And the thing that's standing out to me right now is Jesus. There seems to be a theme of authority that's occurring here, where Jesus says he's Lord of the Sabbath, and then he illustrates that again and teaches in the synagogue, and then he goes out and teaches the crowd of people. But once again, and he's still thematically doing the things that he was doing by giving people rest and relief that the Sabbath should do by healing them and delivering them from unclean spirits. But he's also showing an aspect of his authority. Again, he's not just healing people, but he's showing that he has true understanding and authority of the situation.
Right.
He can tell unclean spirits to leave people, and he can tell them to be silent. And so I think, to me, that's what I'm seeing right now is like an overarching theme of his authority
Yeah.
and will.
Good one. Arlene?
I had an experience yesterday that sort of pertains to all of this,
Yeah?
and I've been wondering about it all day, all night and all day. I had witnessed my neighbor a week ago that I got baptized.
Uh-huh.
And I, you know, went into, anyway, he's a male, and he's catty corner from my apartment, and he's not well. Anyway, he called me up and asked me if I wanted to go with him to the party they were having in the, down below.
Right.
In the office, and for a Christmas party,
Right.
for the building. And so, I said, well, sure, I'll go. So I went, and, you know, he kiddingly said, well, you're my date, you know.
Right.
And so he got me a plate of food, he got me an espresso, and he was very kind.
Uh-huh.
And this woman came up, and she didn't really introduce herself. She started talking to him, and then she said, and you are, and I told her, well, and then she asked me other questions, and other questions, and then she said, well, I gotta go get my food, and I'll be right back. She didn't. She went and got her food all right, but she went over and sat in a couch that was, her back was to me.
Right.
So then, some other women came in, and then they sat there, and no one acknowledged me being there. And I thought, I felt like what she was doing was interviewing me
Yes.
to see, this is what I at the beginning,
Right.
whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat.
Right.
And I felt like she was, this is no. And the rest of the ladies, they were back was to me and never did say a word to me.
Right.
So it's out there.
Right.
Because I think that it's the Lord in me that's coming out, not a Republican
Right.
or a Democrat.
So for those who may not have been able to hear this online, so Arlene had made an effort to mark herself as being a Christian at the place where she lives. And she subsequently went to a meeting, Christmas party, and was feeling at some level that people were distancing themselves from you. That's what we need to be doing, and it will have a reaction, won't it? Sometimes good, sometimes bad. So I wanted to get one more thing out of this. I want to go back and pick up a thought that Chris said, and really Kevin said by connection. One of the other things that's happening here when Jesus said, "I strictly order you not to say anything," I think there's a lesson for us here to embrace, and that lesson is that all things are going to happen in God's own time. Always. Everything is going to happen in God's own time. And sometimes we scratch our heads and say, why not this? And why not that? And why not tell these people to go ahead and talk? Why should he tell them to be quiet? Well, Jesus has got 3 years to do his job, and he knows at the end of 3 years he's going to be dead, and he was ordering how things unfolded so that he got to the end of the 3rd year on the hill above Jerusalem exactly on the day that he wanted to be there. And if he doesn't manage this at some level, I think that's where you were going, Chris, that if this situation doesn't get managed, he's already in the front end of his ministry going into a synagogue, and the people, the Sadducees and the Herodians hate him. And he goes into this setting angry because of how bad this is already going, and yet he's still got a pretty good amount of time to go before he's done doing his job. So I think we can all read this and say to ourselves, God is in complete custody of what's happening here, just as he is in everything else that we see around us. God's got this. It's just hard for us to see it sometimes. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, he's teaching everybody here because pretty quick the crowds are going to want to make him king.
Yes, king.
Ruler, right?
Right.
And,
Physical king.
And yeah, basically saying, I'm in control. So he's telling them he's in control as much as he's telling the Pharisees he's in control because he is.
Right.
And that's, if you look at this situation here with the crowds following him, it's everything the Pharisees would have wanted.
Didn't want, right.
They would have wanted.
Oh, they would want it for themselves, sure.
That's what
Yeah.
they wanted, man. They wanted an
Right.
endearing, following crowd that loved them,
Right,
and Jesus was getting that.
right,
But Jesus was in control over everybody.
right. So we're out of time, but I wanted to throw one little thing in here just because it was interesting to me. I've asked myself the question more than once. When Jesus gets to this spot right here, and there's this fairly long list of people who are following him. Great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumeum, from far beyond the Jordan, from around Tyre and Sidon. So in that quick sentence, it is the whole geographic area around where Jesus is working. Already, that crowd is following him. I've always asked myself the question, I think Todd may know the answer to this, or some of you others. Why do you suppose Jesus got in a boat as opposed to just being in the middle of the crowd, kind of like the setting in Matthew 5, up on the hill? Why do you suppose Jesus got in a boat? Or maybe didn't mean to put you on the spot, Todd. So if you've spent much time on the water in a boat, what's one of the things you learn really quickly about being out on the water?
Sound travels.
Sound travels like crazy, doesn't it? The hard surface of the water causes sound, oftentimes, if we're not careful, to our own embarrassment of things that we say out on the boat. that you can hear on shore. Isn't that interesting? This is just this one little picture of how much complete control Jesus had of the events in every way. Even to the point where he's in this crowd, where all these people are here from all over geographically the area that his ministry is in, and he gets out in a boat. I'll bet you he was actually creating a situation that facilitated him being able, without a loudspeaker, to go do his job, because the water actually ended up being a benefit to him. A microphone so that everybody could hear and everybody could see him, because he wasn't in the middle of a crowd where the people around him would be unable to see him because there was other people in the way. I just wonder if what we're seeing here in him being out in a boat isn't a specific measure of how much he had complete custody and control of what was happening at that moment. Yeah, and again, by application, a little bit to Kevin's thoughts earlier, boy, it's hard to read the gospel very much at all before we see this God whom we serve controlling every event, every moment, everything that happens. And doesn't that give us great hope? Doesn't that give us great confidence that we serve a God who can control things at this level? Yeah. Okay, out of time already. Thanks a lot.